The following podcast contains mature themes and is intended for an adult audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to this episode of Summa Made Simple. In this episode, we shall be continuing our discussion around St. Thomas Aquinas' points around lust, and we shall be looking at the second article of question 154, which concerns the parts of lust. In the last two episodes, we took a bit of a sidebar where we went a lot into humane vitae and the conversation around why contraception is intrinsically evil. And a lot of the ideas in that previous episode, or those two previous episodes, are built up on in these next articles. So it's a good idea, if you haven't listened to those, if you haven't gone through them, to at least go through them and get the idea, the gist of why contraception is intrinsically evil. So in this one, we shall be carrying on from there and moving on to this second article, which asks whether simple fornication is a mortal sin. As I was reading this, I was thinking to myself, why does he speak of it as simple fornication? And I guess, in my opinion, the answer comes from the other articles which follow on this, where so simple fornication is where an unmarried man has sex with an unmarried woman. So two people who are not married having sex with each other. Now, why does he call it simple? Whenever St. Thomas uses the word simple, he means that that thing does not have other parts connected to it. So what are some of the other parts that could be connected to this idea of an unmarried man having sex with an unmarried woman? Or the other part that could be connected to it could be if that unmarried woman has taken a vow to being a nun. Then that's another part that just kind of complicates the issue. So it's no longer simple fornication, but you could call it complex fornication. It's not complex fornication, but the term for it would be sacrilege. So it changes from simple fornication to sacrilege. Another part that could be thrown in there would be is if the unmarried woman or the unmarried man are relatives. They're related to each other at a level of, brother, sister, first cousins, or father, daughter. And in that case, it's incest. So it's no longer simple fornication, but incest. Then it could be another thing which could be added on to this thing of unmarried man and an unmarried woman having sex. Could be if that unmarried woman is, let's call it underage, or the term that St. Thomas uses is a virgin who is under the authority of her parents. And that is not just simple fornication, but that is seduction. So a lot of these other articles which follow from here treat with seduction. And, another part that could be thrown in there is if that's the sexual act between an unmarried man and an unmarried woman is carried out with physical violence, in which case that's rape. It's not simple fornication, it's rape. So all of these are different things which modify simple fornication and transform it into incest or into rape or into seduction or into sacrilege. And those are the different things which he'll cover in the other articles. But we won't go into them because I think we live in a world where, thank God, we haven't gotten to the stage where people think that rape is okay or seduction is okay or sacrilege is okay, or thank God we don't live in a world where people think that incest is okay. We could get there. Let's pray that we do not. So we'll skip those. So for now, we shall go into whether simple fornication is a mortal sin, and then we shall look at another thing, which, because there's some gems in this article. There are some gems in this article which kind of like just enlighten our minds around this topic and give us some very good truths to consider and hold on to. That's what we shall go into. So I won't read it like systematically top to bottom, but I'll jump between the points which I think are absolutely relevant and enlightening to the man on the street today. Then I shall move into whether hugs and kisses and touches are actually mortal sins. There's a question there about whether nocturnal pollution is a mortal sin. In other words, whether having a wet dream is a mortal sin. I'm going to skip that completely. Then you're going to whether seduction, rape, etc., sacrilege, all those, whether those are mortal sins. I'll skip those because I don't think there's anyone who would argue that incest is not a big deal and completely wrong. Then we shall go into the final one, whether the unnatural vice is the greatest sin among the species of lust. We shall go into that because of where we find ourselves today in the 21st century. Yeah, when you have an entire month in the year called Pride Month, you have to discuss these things, unfortunately. So we'll go into them. And that's a topic which, to be honest, I'm not looking forward to it because on the inside, I feel like, gosh, here I am judging all my friends who are gay and lesbian, because I do have gay and lesbian friends. And I feel terrible. It feels like I'm judging them, I'm hitting them hard and attacking them. And what's the term they use? Punching down. But yeah, the truth is the truth. If I had a relative, and I have had relatives who are alcoholics, I wouldn't, for the sake of making them feel good and accepted and included, not tell them that, dude, you got to stop doing this thing because it's harming you. That's not love. So, yeah, anyway, moving on. So, we are at the question around simple fornication, whether simple fornication is a mortal sin. We proceed thus to the second article, objection 1. It would seem that simple fornication is not a mortal sin, for things that come under the same head would seem to be on par with one another. I won't go into that objection. I'll skip to the third, the fourth, and the fifth objection, because those ones, I think, are the ones where the contemporary man actually uses that as an argument, where, the typical thing where two young people, not married, they move in together and they're like, yeah, let's cohabit, let's live together, let's see if this whole thing works. And then they say, yeah, marriage is a social construct that has been designed to keep us in chains and enslaved. And if we really love each other, we don't really need to make any formal commitment to each other. Our love is sufficient. All those arguments are going to be covered in this specific article, and they're touched on in the objections. So I shall go to the fourth and the fifth objections, which I think are particularly relevant to the man in the street today. The fourth objection says further, so remember, we're asking ourselves whether fornication is a mortal sin, right? And this fourth one says, every mortal sin is contrary to charity. In other words, every mortal sin is contrary to love of God and love of neighbor. That's what charity means. But simple fornication is not contrary to charity, not contrary to love, neither as regards the love of God, since it is not a sin directly against God, nor as regards the love of our neighbor, since through it no one is injured. Therefore, simple fornication is not a mortal sin. So that speaks to the common argument today, that whole thing of two consenting adults. Who are we harming? Who are we hurting? If two consenting adults decide to live together and have sex on the regular, and they're not married, they're not hurting anyone. So please, stay out of our business. Stay in your lane. We're not hurting you, so don't tell us anything. Objection number 5. Further, every mortal sin leads to eternal perdition, but simple fornication does not have this result, because a gloss on St. Ambrose's commentary on 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 8, where St. Paul says, godliness is profitable to all things. St. Ambrose, commenting on that, says, the whole of Christian teaching is summed up in mercy and godliness. If a man conforms to this, even though he gives way to the inconstancy of the flesh, doubtless he will be punished, but he will not perish. Therefore, simple fornication is not a mortal sin. What is the thought behind this? The thought behind this is, if I really, really love God, and I've met many Christians like this, who say, if I really, really love God, and I go to church, and I pray, I mean, surely God will forgive me for sleeping with my girlfriend. God will forgive me for committing fornication because I really, really love God. And this points to that fact that a person can have a deep love of God, a deep sense of loving God, and at the same time, always keep falling in this area of fornication and sins of lust and sexual sins of the flesh, keep falling in them over and over and over again, but still have this deep sense of loving God. St. Augustine is actually a good example of this before he made that firm decision to change. When you tell God, I want to be pure, but not yet. I want to be pure, but not yet. I think there are very many Christians who are in this situation of, I want to be pure, but not yet. So these two, I think, are the two, at least in my experience, common objections which I've come across whenever this topic of fornication being a serious, serious sin comes up. So let's jump to St. Thomas's reply to this whole question. On the contrary, it is written in Tobias chapter 4, verse 13. Remember, Tobias is one of those books that's found in the Catholic Bible, which has 73 books, as opposed to the Protestant Bible, which has 66 books. So Tobias is one of those, they're called deuterocanonical books, like extra list, second list. That's what deuterocanonical means. Take heed to keep thyself from all fornication, and beside thy wife never endure to know a crime. Now, crime denotes a mortal sin. This is St. Thomas speaking. Now, crime denotes a mortal sin. Therefore, fornication and all intercourse with other than one's wife is a mortal sin. Further, nothing but mortal sin debars a man from God's kingdom. But fornication debars him, as shown by the words of the apostles in Galatians 5, verse 21, who, after mentioning fornication and certain other vices, adds, "They who do such things shall not obtain the kingdom of God." Therefore, simple fornication is a mortal sin. And adding on to that, St. Thomas quotes the Decretals 22, where it is, what are the Decretals? So Decretals are letters that are written by the popes over centuries. One pope, then another pope, then another pope, and it kind of becomes like a body of work in which the pope replies to a question or an issue or a controversy, and then that kind of becomes like it's similar to precedent in law. When someone says, okay, we should make this, when a judge says, based on precedents, I make this decision about this and that or the other because previous judges had decided that. Think of the decretals as a similar concept within the church, the law of the church, of the Catholic Church, where a pope makes a decision about a very specific issue, and then that decision is used to influence other decisions in the future. So that's the decretals. And St. Thomas, quoting from the decretals, says, they should know that the same penance is to be enjoined or is to be prescribed for perjury as for adultery, fornication, and willful murder and other criminal offenses. So even just from that wording, you see that fornication is, in terms of penance, is at the same level as willful murder. So it's a big deal. Therefore, simple fornication is a criminal or mortal sin. I answer that. So now St. Thomas explains why fornication is a mortal sin. I answer that. Without any doubt, we must hold simple fornication to be a mortal sin, notwithstanding that a gloss on Deuteronomy 23:17 says, this is a prohibition against going into whores whose vileness is venial. Or instead of venial, it should be venal, since such is a wanton's trade. I think that's a minor detail, but let's carry on. We're going to get to the heart of this thing. In order to make this evident, we must take note that every sin committed directly against human life is a mortal sin. That's the heart of this argument. Every sin committed directly against human life is a mortal sin. That's the heart. Now, simple fornication implies an inordinateness that tends to injure the life of the offspring to be born of this union. That's the principle which he's going to use to develop his argument about how simple fornication directly injures the life of another person. Why? Because it injures the life of the offspring to be born of the sexual act. This is his explanation. For we find in all animals where the upbringing of the offspring needs care of both male and female, that these come together not indeterminately, but the male with a certain female, whether one or several. Such is the case with all birds. While on the other hand, among those animals where the female alone suffices for the offspring's upbringing, the union is indeterminate, as in the case of dogs and like animals. In other words, what he's saying is, when you look at nature, at the world, where the offspring of male and female need both male and female for that offspring to grow and develop and mature, the way that male and female will come together is not going to be random. It's going to be planned, and they're going to stick together. Why? Because both are needed for the offspring to come up, to be brought up. But where only the female is needed, then that mating can be completely random. The male comes into the picture, he does his thing and is gone out. He's not needed again because only the female is needed. And now we come to a great truth about mankind. Now it is evident that the upbringing of a human child requires not only the mother's care for his nourishment, but much more the care of his father as guide and guardian, and under whom he progresses in goods, both internal and external. This is heavy. This is a heavy statement. I'll read it again slowly. Now it is evident that the upbringing of a human child requires not only the mother's care for his nourishment, but much more the care of his father as guide and guardian, and under whom he progresses in goods, both internal and external. That sentence is so heavy. I don't even know where to start, but I'll give let me give it a try here. Let me try and unpack this. There's a concept which one has to understand, which is the difference between schooling and education. This is something which Mortimer Adler speaks of in when he explains this, it's brilliant. I wish I could unpack this in 2 minutes the way he does but he takes a whole, he does it in a long period of articles, but I'll try and do it in 30 seconds. Basically, schooling is where we learn how to read, how to write, how to talk, how to look after ourselves, personal hygiene, how to wash, how to brush our teeth, how to comb our hair. All of that is part of schooling. It starts at home with the mother and the children, and then it continues into school. Roughly, it ends by the time you're 17, 18 years old for most people. So that's schooling. You're just learning some skills that are needed for survival. Then you have education. Education is the growth in virtue, the actualization or the manifestation or the making real of all the different potentialities, the fulfillment of all the powers and abilities and capabilities and capacities which we have within ourselves, those things being brought to fruition. Now that is the work of a lifetime. Schooling happens within plus minus the first 2 decades of the life of a human being. Education takes the rest of one's life. Now, schooling tends, in the large part, especially in the early years, to be the province of the mother or the maternal figure, learning those basic skills which a person just needs to survive. Education, on the other hand, a huge part of it, in terms of growing in these virtues, in terms of learning the important values which one needs in order to become the person one is meant to be, it does not just depend on one person, it depends on a whole plethora of people. It depends on teachers, it depends on leaders, it depends on parents, it depends on friends, and most importantly, it depends on yourself. At some stage, you become the primary agent of your own education, and failure to do this results in a life of vice. Within that picture, within that broad picture, the father plays a very key role because human beings learn through imitation. That's the first way in which we learn. We learn to walk by looking at how other people walk. We learn to speak by listening to how other people speak. We learn by imitation. Now, when a human being is brought up by father and mother, over those first 2 decades of their life, they get a lot of schooling of the learning of those basic skills: how to walk, how to talk, how to comb your hair, how to brush your teeth. A lot of those basic skills are learned from the mother. A lot of the values are learned through imitation by looking at the father. Things like wake up on time, get your butt out of bed, go to work, come home, do the chores, fix the leaking tap, fix the light bulb which is not working, sit down, listen to people, ask them how their day was, ask them if you finished your homework, sit down with the child and help them do their homework. A lot of those things are not schooling, they're not learning like skills, but it's precisely by looking and seeing this is what this person does. The child has a counterpoint in which they see what it looks like to live out certain values. And this is what St. Thomas, or it doesn't use the word education, but this is the foundation of education which continues throughout the rest of a human person's life because they have seen it modeled before them in the life and the activity and the actions of their father. And St. Thomas Aquinas says that this is more important. His words, he says, the child requires not only the mother's care for his nourishment, but much more the care of his father as guide. A guide is someone who goes before you and gives you a model. It says, go this way, don't go that way, follow this route, don't take that path. He's a guide. And a guardian. He looks after and he protects, under whom he progresses in goods, both internal, which are the virtues, and then external goods. And you know, this thing of the external good is really important. I was reading a book by Thomas Sowell called Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell. Fantastic read. And the thing I love about Thomas Sowell is he just comes with stats. Like, he doesn't come with arguments, doesn't come with theories, he just comes with statistics. And one of the statistics he gives is the average income. The average income between a child who was brought up in a single-parent home and a child who was brought up in a home with both parents present. And he was looking at African Americans in the United States in the 50s, 60s, 70s. Those are the stats he was looking at. And the point he got from those statistics was that when a child is brought up in a home with both parents, that child is far more likely to make a much bigger income growing up, to have a far more stable job, to get a better job, etc., than a child who grew up in a single-parent home. He didn't give the reasons, he just gave the statistics. My rationale for that is that when you grow up with both parents present, especially with the father present, the father is the one who teach you a specific trade, he's the one who will introduce you to specific connections, he's the one who will give you advice about a profession, a line of work to carry out in your life, etc., etc. Why? Because the father predominantly is the breadwinner in the family most of the time. So he's the one who's going out there, who's working his fingers to the bone, who's putting bread on the table, etc. So he's the one who's most likely, because the mother is busy nourishing the child, bringing up the child, teaching the child these basic skills that are needed for them just to survive. And the father is the one who's creating the enabling environment for that to happen. And so the father is the one who is best placed to teach the child going forward how to create that enabling environment of how to work, how to earn money, how to win friends and influence people so that you can get those jobs and you can get those promotions. This is why St. Thomas says, this is my opinion, this is why St. Thomas says that the child needs much more than just the mother's care for his nourishment. He needs much more the care of his father as guide and guardian, under whom he progresses in goods, both internal and external. I am deeply cognizant of the time, and I really don't want to stop there, but I have to stop there for this episode, and we shall carry on in the next episode with this development of this idea of why both parents are needed for the upbringing of a child, which is why simple fornication is such a big deal and a serious sin.